All right, I think it's time. So it's 12:05. Like, thank you so much for joining, everyone. So this has been um, like a topic that I've been wanting to talk more about. I think for years now. So ever since I could remember. Uh, oh, hey, mom, how's it going? So yeah, so ever since I can remember, like I feel like when people think about games, they don't necessarily have this conception that you could use games for learning. And so this is sort of a misconception that I felt like I wanted to correct, like with many examples, because I also feel that famous game developers, like people like Jonathan Blow, don't necessarily do the best job in terms of communicating like why like video games are particularly well suited for learning, and what kinds of learning is it suited for. And so the idea is like, and I think like my first observation here is I remember like when I was a kid, I would play a lot of chess. And even though like I definitely used chess as a way to procrastinate from like all the homework I needed to do, like everyone around me thought like, oh, like you're a chess player, so you must be strategic and it must like be developing like the skills in your mind. However, like when I make the same argument for video games, I feel like people are sort of suspending their disbelief, like they don't necessarily agree as much. And so, like, I just kind of want to set the record straight and say, like, okay, here's why I particularly think, like, and in which domains do I think video games do a particularly good job. So, the idea is that, like, play is sort of like this thing that's not just like proper to humans. Like it's sort of a property of many other mammals, where, like, for example, cats learn, like play, like when cats play with little birds and stuff, they're actually learning to hunt. And actually, if you can we can like sort of look at a video here so that which will make the point really clear. I'm just picking like an arbitrary cat play video. Hopefully this will be cute. An 8-hour bonanza. Oh no, this is something else. Yeah, so let's look at this. For example. So you'll see here like there's a couple of stuff you'll notice here, like the fact like that they're sneaking, even though there's kittens and they're cute, like the fact that they're sneaking in narrow places, the fact that they're like using like jabbing their paws like that, like this is really how they would grab any sort of prey, like a bird or a bug or whatever. And so like even though like we think this is cute, like the reason they enjoy doing it so much is because like they're actually practicing a real world skill, like in like a real world cat skill in a domain that's like relatively safer. Like if they were to do this like maybe on like a scorpion, like they're gonna get injured if they're doing it the first time. So for the first couple of years of their development, we see cats sort of do like this like display, which is like pretty harmless. They'll do it like with their with their litter mates as well, and this ends up like teaching them the kinds of skills that they need to be able to actually hunt in the real world. So and sort of like I'm making the case that like let's say video games aren't all that different. Like in particular, like what's kind of unique about cats playing and about video games is that you don't need a rule book. Like no professor at Harvard has written like a textbook that goes, this is how cats should hunt, and then all cats read it and then can successfully hunt in the real world. That's not how it works. So in fact, like what they're doing is closer to a game than it is to a textbook, and the main property that's very interesting about games for teaching is that they don't need a rule book. Like you don't need a guide, you don't need a teacher. It's just something you do. Like you get feedback from the environment, and it's something you slowly get better at over time. And so in particular, like, I mean, I do mention video games in particular, not all games, because board games, I would argue, are not as good at teaching because board games have lengthy rulebooks. So as an example, like I downloaded the rulebook here for one of my favorite board games. Like it's called Twilight Struggle. Where is it? Barry Access here. No, okay, well, let's just get it. So Twilight Struggle. So Twilight Struggle is a game that's sort of like Risk. But the difference in it is that it's just like 1v1, and you're sort of playing like one person role plays as the Soviet Union, the other person role plays as the United States, and you end up like doing this like lengthy influence-based combat. The game is like super engaging, but before you can even learn how to play the game, like you need to read this thing. So this is about a 30-page rule book that's extremely technical. It often reads here, like you'll see it has like numbered rules. There's rule sequences, there's sub rules, many examples, and while this is actually a good rule book because it is clear, you basically need to read this whole thing before you can actually even begin to play. And so a game of Twilight Struggle would take about 5 hours to play. Reading the rule book the first time took me about like pretty much 2 days. So it was just like an entire weekend. Like all I did was just like read this as if it was work. And then by the time I was also playing this game for the first time with my friends, I misunderstood some of the rules. And so I actually played the game wrong, which made some of the strategies like less interesting in the game. And so it was really only up until the second time I played that I even understood what this game was about. And so total time investment, I put in maybe about like 15 hours worth of my time before I could actually even begin to successfully play this game. So how can we avoid this? Like, because like some people like, and I have friends that like genuinely enjoy this. Like they enjoy reading long, complex rule books. Like I even had a friend tell me, like I enjoy reading dictionaries, and I think that's great. But I would argue most people don't enjoy reading dictionaries. Like most people enjoy just learning by example, which is something that video games do a lot better than board games, which is something I'll go into in a sec. So what's kind of unique about video games in this sense is that they're like an active entertainment channel, in the sense that like if you don't do anything, for the most part, not much happens. Like you need to act in the environment for anything to happen. And generally in most games, like you don't get walls of text telling you like, well, if you jump on a Goomba, like in Mario, then the Goomba's gonna die. Like you just walk in the Goomba, you die. The second time you see a Goomba, you jump on them, they die. And so you end up basically teaching the player without actually holding their hand. They just learn by virtue of playing the game more and more. But again, like, so if we get back to the title of this talk, like I'm making the claim that like video games can help you learn. But the kinds of learning it helps you do maybe are not we wouldn't be able to match the kinds of things you can learn one-to-one to books, for example. So let's say my goal was to just teach you a large block of information. Like for example, I want you to learn all the ways in which like mitochondria acts, for example. And so like probably still the best way to learn that would be to just get like a 500-page textbook, highlight every single piece of information until you memorize it, and then eventually over time maybe you'll do a couple more experiments in the lab, or you'll become a doctor and you'll be able to test out your knowledge of how mitochondria works. So this is not the kind of learning that video games are ideal at. And in fact, there's a sort of trap here where for the most part, people that have attempted at emulating books via video games fall into this trap called edutainment. So edutainment was this trend that I saw become very popular in the 90s, which was like the main idea being that you, for example, let's say, have a character that goes like, well, like, I want you to multiply 4 and 10. And then a kid's supposed to answer 40, but we want to make this fun. And so instead of putting it on a piece of paper, we'll just have some sort of goofy cartoon character, and then we'll just, again, say 4 times 10 in a bubble, and if the kid answers 40, then like the guy will clap. This is not what video games are good at. Like if anything, I would argue this should not be the goal of learning, period. And perhaps one of the reasons why edutainment sucks is because sort of the modern lecture style of here's a lecture, here's some homework testing your knowledge about the lecture. This also sucks. So if anything, like this model goes back, people take this model for granted, but I just want to show you like how far back this model goes. So this is called like the Austrian model, so the Prussian model. And so this is a fairly old model. So you'll see back, like it goes back to something like 1748 here. And basically this idea that like I'm going to give out a lecture and then students are going to be in class and they're going to take notes. This model was developed back in a time when books were very expensive. So before like modern day printing press, before it was possible for us to cheaply access information on the internet, books used to cost as much as a house, which meant only rich people could own books, which meant that you needed some sort of school system for everybody else where you could read out from a book and learn. Given that we don't have this constraint, it makes sense to question back this assumption, because we do spend like about 20 years. I spent about 20 years in schools and universities and master's programs. And so it makes some sense to question the system, given that we're spending so much time in it. In fact, if you look at the history, and I've written a lot about this topic, like the modern day schooling system is by far the longest initiation rite in human history. And we take it for granted, and questioning it is basically sacrosanct. And I don't think it's very productive because while I do think there's some useful stuff about the model, I do think a lot of it can change. One of the major things that I would change about it is I would make it shorter and encourage guided learning. So basically, like, teach people how to get self-motivated to want to learn stuff themselves. And I'm arguing in this talk that video games are ideal for this. So let's get back to, like, why do we think that games could be particularly well suited for learning? So the main reason I'm making this argument is that really you only live once, in the sense that it's very hard for you to learn stuff outside of your immediate culture and profession. As in, like, I can ask a doctor, for example, what it's like to be a doctor. But unless I'm a doctor myself, like, I have no idea what I'm talking about. Like, it's one of those things I need to experience for myself and see how it works. Similarly, like, I know, for example, being a truck driver sounds like a very stressful profession because you're driving over long distances, you're away from your family, you need a lot of discipline, you need to stay awake you need to be focused for very long hours, or else you're going to do something very dangerous. Like, it's very difficult for me to experience that kind of job at my software job, just because I picked a different profession, so I'm never going to really learn how this other stuff works. So thankfully, video games free us from this constraint. Like, it frees you from this constraint of only being able to learn stuff that's inside your immediate profession and culture. So now, like, instead of sort of like, so now that I've sort of introduced the theory, I want to talk the theory for this talk. I want to introduce like many examples that will show you what I mean by education here. So the way I want to do this is, instead of giving you more examples, instead of giving you more theory, I want to give you more examples, and you can kind of see for yourself how these games teach these specific skills, and hopefully it'll inspire you to either play more games or make your own games to teach people, or at the very least just change your opinion about like what it means to learn in a game. So the first game I want to look at is Diplomacy. So Diplomacy is a board game very similar to Risk. The difference in Diplomacy, so I'll just show you what Diplomacy looks like. So here I'm just going on Google Images. So yeah, so this is the board for the game, and so if we go here, so this is what the map sort of looks like here. So we have this map, and oh wait, why is this a video? Yeah, so we have this map, and this map will have like many different countries on it, and so you end up with a bunch of units, and every turn, the way this game works is that, oh hey, well, Mishka, nice to have you in chat as well. So every turn, what you're gonna do is you're gonna come in, and you are going to in secret say, like, I want to, for example, move my units from Constantinople to Bulgaria, and every other player does this at the same time, and actions are resolved simultaneously. The key thing is that you don't know what everyone else is gonna do, like you know what everyone else is gonna do at the same time, not in turn like in games like Risk. And very differently from Risk, as opposed to taking, like, let's say 10 minutes per turn or something, in Diplomacy, it's very common for you to take a week for a turn. So full games of Diplomacy will often take months, and the first time I played Diplomacy, the game took about like 6 months to finish. And let me just show you some of the interactions this game created. So in Risk, typically, you would expect, it's like, oh, like, I don't like this person, like, you know, like, they're my husband, I don't like them, like, I'm gonna attack them. You know, and that's great and all, like there's still some strategy in the game, but it doesn't look like this. Like, let me show you, for example, so these are some email exchanges that, like, with my friend Stefan that I played Diplomacy with, and I just want to show you, like, the kinds of stuff we would talk about. So it seems to me that the southern front has been pierced rather quickly by the Italians, that the northern progress has been rather slow and probably stall further at St. Petersburg. So I'm happy to discuss how we could leverage the situation, but it would be a thorough bilateral attack against both the French and the Russians. And so you see here, very differently from Risk, where everyone's sitting at the same table, here you can see like John and Stefan are talking to each other in private and plotting in private. And so you can have all sorts of like private discussions where Stefan could be saying something to John, and then in parallel telling me something completely different. Stefan could lie about what John said, and then if I were to call him out on it, John would then figure out that me and Stefan are secretly negotiating among each other. And so this is insane to me. Like, the fact that you can have this sort of experience in a game where you can actually get some sense of what it would be like to negotiate in the real world is amazing. Like, the fact that, let's say, typically, like, you'll notice in this game that you would imagine that initially you want to be very honest so that people trust you. But like near the end game, that's when you want to sort of backstab people and end up taking up more territory. So you would expect this strategy to work. Turns out this strategy also doesn't work, because if you play multiple games with the same people, like they'll be aware of your shenanigans and they'll be less willing to trust you. So bad blood carries over the same way that it does in the real world. So I would argue, if you are someone who is considering to maybe do something like Model UN or learn political science, your time is much better spent playing a game of diplomacy. You'll learn so much more about negotiation than you ever would doing something like taking a political science degree, where for the most part you're maybe reading some history, reading some random documents from like UN treaties. Like, you want to actually practice negotiation, you can just play diplomacy. But this is and this is just like one element, right? Like, this is just one example. Like, I want to learn negotiation, I'm saying you can play diplomacy. But there's other examples. So let's say you want to learn programming. Like, you come in and you want to learn programming, and what you expect is to just, be given like exactly like these sort of walls where you have like some hacker in sunglasses like going in like furiously typing at their keyboard, and you go like, well, like maybe I'm not smart enough to be like a programmer. And the fact is, like, media doesn't even help here. Like, this is, if you look at media, like, this is the kind of shit they produce, and they go like, well, like, it's I don't know what the point of this image is, this brain or whatever, and they end up doing this stuff. I don't know, it just does a disservice. And this is like so far removed from what actual programming is that it just does a disservice. It just intimidates people, makes it harder for people to get into it. So, well, what can this look like instead? So I want to show you an example of a game by a developer that I really love called Zachtronics. It's a studio that was started by this guy called Zach Barth. And why is this updating? By this guy called Zach Barth. And he develops like very programming heavy games. But the unique thing about them is that he makes them fun. And so while learning how to program initially is sort of this very stressful Sisyphean task, you can sort of, and people try to, so people try to make it more accessible by, like, let's say making it like, let's say like the Scratch environments. So I want to just show you, for example, Scratch programming here. So for example, this is sort of a way that people often try to make programming more accessible. It's called Scratch. And it's a visual programming language where you end up putting like code fragments and blocks like this. And I would put Scratch very similarly to what I would say about a lot of edutainment, which is that it removes it's not fun and it's also hard. So it takes the worst of both worlds. It's a bad game and it's like a bad programming environment. But like, what if we were willing to just make something like a better game? Then what could it look like? So I just want to show you an example from this game called Shenzhen I. So in Shenzhen I, like, the premise of the game is you're not like an adventurer off on some quest to save the magical princess from the magical castle. Instead, what you're trying to do is you're a software engineer at a hardware firm in China, and your goal is to produce produce hardware for your company. So you just come in here, you take in quests from your email. So you come in here and you're like, okay, well, these are your like nerdy colleagues, and you come in and you're like, great, like I want to, let's say, build an esports sign. And so, for example, I just want to show you, like, let's say a design I made here. Wait, where is my design? It went away. Okay. Yeah, so let's say, like, you'll often see tutorials and they'll try to do something like teach you assembly, right? And then you look at assembly, it's very boring, but instead, like, here they've sort of gamified it and they tell you, like, look, you need to produce like this output signal, and you can do it by writing these instructions. So instead of you just doing this thing in a vacuum, you're actually doing it in a fairly fun environment. Like, you're actually here, you're building a security camera with blinking lights. So on one hand, you're questioning, like, why is it that I'm building this thing? And that creates a nice storytelling opportunity. But on the other hand, you are actually writing like assembly. Like, this is like simplified assembly code. But it'll actually get you much closer to the experience of what it's like to debug your code and change it. And while this is a very simple example, excuse me, I want to show you what some people have done that's like a bit more interesting. So let's say, I didn't produce this because I haven't played this game so much, but like here, so this is I'm gonna go like crazy design, for example, and so like what did some people do here? So I think Shenzhen IO music, for example. Yeah. So this is, for example, a design that some dude, GTW123, made to port Rick Astley's "Never Gonna Give You Up" song. So we're dancing and jamming, but like, look at this thing. Like, this is actually complicated. Like, this has RAM. This has commands that are being linked to each other. It has like some sound generation. So if someone can produce something like this, like, why wouldn't they be a great programmer? And if this was, and if this is a tool for people to actually get started with games, like, why not? Like this is more fun. It's more engaging, and yeah, I mean, it's not serious. It's not a real programming language. Like, you're not going to be able to use this to directly make money, but the skills you learn will translate. So Sarah is saying, like, you can play as a tool for learning, and you can develop cognitive and social skills. Yeah, I 100% agree, and I would argue that the spectrum is a lot wider than you'd think, and some of the examples that I want to show, like, are going to make this point even clearer. So like I said, you can get to very complicated stuff very quickly, but it doesn't end here. So let's say, like, this is just one of the Zachtronics games, but here's like another one that I really like, called Opus Magnum. So Opus Magnum is a sort of, you can think of it as a sort of very basic introduction to organic chemistry. And so in this game, what you're trying to do is you're trying to like fit chemical compounds together and make them react with each other to create new compounds. So you're a chemist, or like in the game setting, you're actually an alchemist. So let's look at how this game does things differently. So here, for example, like, we're not even actually looking at code. Like, we're looking at refining gold, for example. And you can see the game here tests you out on several spectrums. Like, maybe your design is very cheap, or maybe your design is very fast, or maybe your design doesn't take up a lot of space. Similarly, in engineering, we often have these trade-offs where you want to make something cheap, you want to make it fast, you want to make it cheap. And so, I can come in here, rough and gold. Let's open up my old design. So this is, for example, what my old design looked like. And if I run it, this is the thing running. So this was, for example, a design that takes up very little space, but it's expensive since these parts are expensive. And it looks cool. Like, I mean, this is just a very basic example, but I really had to like bust my head to actually get this to work. The music puts me in this like very meditative trance-like state. And it's similar, like, I mean, one of the things I notice is that a lot of programmers will also often have some sort of repetitive techno music because it gets them in the zone. So again, like, the game is even helping you and giving you the step where it's like, well, here's some music that can help you get in the zone. But that's sort of like, like, let me show you some of the more complicated stuff that people have done with this game. So Opus Magnum, let's say crazy design, for example. Let's see, is it something like this? No, this is something simple. Opus Magnum complex. Okay, so someone wrote a full interpreter for a programming language using this. And this is what it looks like. So very differently. So mine, you'll notice, had only like 2 pieces. Like, look at this thing. Like what is even going on here? Like you look at this, and it's very easy to just be like, I have no idea what's going on. This sort of boggles my mind. I have no idea how someone would even think of designing a programming interpreter in a game like Opus Magnum, or why they would do it. But the fact that they are means that this game is cultivating their curiosity. It means that it's pushing them to create something, and this attitude is going to translate to really anything they do, whether it's a programming language or whether it's something artistic. And if this game facilitated it to them, then, why not? And so these are sort of games that almost, like, while they're not real programming language, it's easy to convince yourself, okay, well, I am learning a real skill because it kind of looks like programming. But, like, let's make this analogy a bit looser now. Like, let's get away from just looking at strict programming environment and still see, like, what we can learn from various kinds of games. So this is one of my favorite games. It's called Factorio. So in this game, what you're basically doing is building a factory. And, while that sounds really boring, this is by far like one of the most addictive games that I've ever played. And I just want to show you some of the interesting elements about this game. So just gonna wait for this thing to load. So the goal of Factorio is you're trying to basically set up a factory so you can build a rocket and launch to space. I almost lost my boyfriend to Factorio. Yeah, that happens. But here's the thing, like I think you could maybe also lose your boyfriend who's like really engaged for like in some programming task, but you're gonna think if it's work you're not gonna say anything. But because it's a game, that becomes easier to get frustrated. So let me just show you this. So like let's say here you come in here, and this is what this is my whole factory. So you can see this looks super complicated. It basically looks like the back of a chip card, and I just built this whole thing myself. Like, it took me about 30 hours to build. So you can see here, for example, I come in here and I'm building these circuits. I come in here, and here, for example, I'm building green circuits. And so you see there's a sort of pipeline where like my green circuit production is dependent on me building copper wires and having copper plates. My blue wires are in turn dependent on me having red circuits and green circuits. So you know, there's a whole pipeline that goes back. So then I go like, oh, okay, well, my copper here is being smelted from scratch, and my copper ores are being delivered to my base via a train which I'm unloading, and this train is actually also loading copper from this faraway base that I have. So this game is teaching you about, like, at the very basic level, about how to set up like pipelines where you need to stage production in the right ratios, about train systems and how to manage a full train system with where they could be competing on the same tracks, a logistic network with circuits where you need to set up different signals to know when to activate different parts of your factory. And this is just the very beginning. Like, I mean, I did all of this and I was able to beat the game, but the game doesn't end actually when you launch a rocket. Like, if anything, that's just a tutorial. The game actually, like, people have built some stuff here. Like, let me show you some of the stuff that people have actually built in this game. So for example, this is someone that actually was able to do a fully animated video in Factorio, and this I just find mind-boggling. So you can come in here, let me make sure the music's on. All right, I hope you can hear the rude soundtrack. But yeah, you see this? So this is not a video, like this is a factory. So Pac-Man and Sudoku were also made within Factorio. I mean, yeah, like that's what's incredible. Like, it's actually like a probably very poor programming environment, but the fact that it's sort of tapping into people's creativity to want to create these things, to me, is just mind-boggling. And so, like, if I scroll at the very end of the video, you'll see here that this is actually a factory. If you zoom in, you'll see that there's all these circuits here set up that do all of this work. So this is just one application, but you can see, like, let's say if I looked at the Factorio megabases here. So some people have built some of this stuff, like where you actually look at this factory. So this is a factory that's a lot better than mine. And people like will actually look at the full production of their different resources, you know, like, and they'll build stuff that looks closer like this. And you'll notice that it looks a lot less spaghetti than what I built. So I hope this guy zooms in. Yeah, so you can see here, like, they'll have this full pipeline, like a very robust train system. And this is because the game doesn't have a concrete goal. It means that, like, the game doesn't end when it ends. It just ends when you're bored of it. And a lot of people just never seem to get bored of it. Like, and if you look at the Steam reviews for a game like Factorio, like, I just want to show you some of this stuff, like, because I think the reviews are very telling. Like here, it's like these guys, like 1,300 hours, 300 hours, 400 hours. Like, people are spending a lot of their free time playing this game because it just continues to be engaging. Like, it continues to be rewarding, even like the more time they spend in it. And if anything, contrary to many other kinds of games, I would argue like Factorio gets more interesting the more time you spend in it. And this is actually closer to a skill. Like, let's say the more time you spend drawing, the better of an illustrator you become, the more interesting illustrating becomes. Versus, like, let's say I would take like a typical hack and slash game, the more you play the game, if anything, the more tedious the game becomes. And so after you're done with the game, you're just a lot less likely to pick it up. So this is just another example. And so there's often like a lot of stuff like people talk about in programming, like legacy code, like premature optimization, like scaling. And the way we teach this is often like we recommend people to buy this book, like the Gang of Four book. Let me show it to you. So this book, for example, is called Design Patterns, like the Elements of Reusable Object-Oriented Programming. And so you read this book, And it basically reads like a dictionary. Like it goes like, well, if you have this problem, this is the pattern that you should use. And if you have this other problem, this is this other pattern that you use. And so they end up giving you a cookbook of all the patterns that work well in C++, but they don't actually teach you how to think about why these design patterns are useful. And so if anything, I would argue playing Factorio is a better use of your time than reading The Gang of Four. And this is obviously a controversial claim, since Factorio is very addictive, it's very fun, while reading Gang of Four isn't. But despite that, it's still actually more educational. Like it's more educational and it's more fun. And so as far as I'm concerned, it's just a superior medium for teaching these kinds of lessons. Like I said, maybe if you want to learn how to become a Python programmer, like doing something like playing the Zachtronics games wouldn't be the best thing to do, but it's still better than most books that you could pick up on the topic. So another thing I want to talk about is chess and DotA. And so the reason I mentioned both of these games is both of these games become fun via competition. So if you were to just play chess by yourself, it's not a very engaging game. If you play chess versus some bots that really sucked, it would also be a horrible game. But the fact is that because there's hundreds of years of history of people playing these games, of getting better at them, at writing books about them, the game continues to be engaging. And DotA does something very similar, where even the rules of the game are slowly tweaked over time so that the optimal strategies change over time. And so I just want to show you something like why like DotA is the game that I've spent the most time on like ever. So I just want to show you some quick things about the game. So I'm just not going to talk too much about chess because I assume like most people are familiar with the game and have played around with it. But DotA I would imagine is a bit rare. So first off, like you go into DotA, and the first thing you'll notice is that like you have like all these heroes. Like so there's about 100 heroes. Each hero has about 4 unique abilities that are extremely different. And then each hero can also have a choice of like 100 different items to buy. And so you end up with this sort of like unbounded space of possibilities that you can act in. So what can you do this? Like this is sort of like the ground rules for this game. But what can you do with it? So let me just show you something here. So let's say I want to do the learning custom lobbies. Create. Let's do this. So, okay, please work. Yeah. So let's just give this a second to load. But like here I'm picking like a sort of generic hero. For example, Dragon Knight is a hero that is known to be very tanky. So you can like basically be a frontline for your team and soak up damage while the rest of your friends do damage. And all other heroes have other like very different ideas. Like for example, like if you're playing Ember Spirit, like Ember Spirit has insane mobility. You can jump around and teleport across the map and attack very quickly. Same for Storm Spirit. Necrophos like regens the more people around him die. And so you basically want these like long extended fights. So each hero basically dictates a sort of unique strategy where if you can imagine like similar in warfare, like let's say the Kalashnikov is great like if you're doing like short combat, but maybe you want a sniper rifle if you're really far away. And so the game also encourages this sort of thinking here. So like I said here, you come in here, there's all of these items that you can buy. All of these unique items have very unique interactions and spells that completely change the game. And one of the best things about the game is that there's fog of war. So you'll notice here that I can't actually see what's going on here relative to here. Like the map is grayed out, which means I don't have vision there. So let's say if I were to walk here, but then my enemy is all waiting here, they can just like jump on top of me and kill me here. And so the game ends up having like a big emphasis on ambushing because of imperfect information that games with perfect information like chess sorely lack. And fog of war is a very basic element in warfare. Like in warfare, information is asymmetrical because your spies will have different information. You may have better technology. But if anything, this game sort of gave me like a sense and element for what it means to actually ambush people than any other book, textbook or history book ever did. So that's just DotA. But let's say like we can sort of extend this analogy. So there's other games like, for example, like Company of Heroes, that talk a lot about that are really good at showing you what, like, let's say more traditional World War II style warfare would look like. So for example, like if I were to just show you the game here, I'm not gonna, it's gonna take a while to load, but let's say here, like this is some gameplay footage from the game. And you'll see here, for example, that, okay, well, we have like some units, they have abilities, you put them behind cover because being behind cover is a lot better. So you end up learning, and that's actually a big thing in World War II. Like one of the reasons why they had so many trenches is because trenches were great at protecting you. And then how do you fight trenches? Artillery. How do you fight trenches? Like gas weapons. And so the technologies at the time end up enforcing the other technologies to beat those technologies. And you end up learning a lot about history and military warfare just by playing a game, even though the game is not even trying to teach you military warfare. Like the game just wants you to have fun. And you end up having like way more fun than reading, like, let's say the novel of some general about warfare. Because the designers, to motivate the design for this game, actually had to go to those books, understand what was unique about warfare in World War II, and then translate this into game mechanics that are actually fun and engaging. And so you end up turning something that's very boring, like reading military journals, into something very exciting, like a strategy game. But this is sort of like, to me at least, just this sort of traditional warfare was something that was very familiar to me in a lot of games. Like, a lot of strategy games do this idea of you have a bunch of units, you select them. But there's a subgenre of war games called logistics games that I want to talk about, that I personally felt was very unique and that taught me a lot. So there's this game called Unity of Command, and it's what is called a war game. Even though what's very interesting about this genre is that it's hardly about war. And what I mean about that is that, like, war in World War II had two separate challenges. One was actual warfare, which is I am fighting other people at the front lines. We are shooting at each other with artillery. We're trying to spy each other. Everyone's familiar with this aspect of warfare because we've all watched like World War II movies. We've all maybe played some form of strategy game. So this is old news to us. But here's another game that takes a very different approach to this. So let's say here, let's say I would come in here. Let me reduce the volume a bit. Super loud. So this game basically emphasizes the second aspect of war, which I basically like to call like the Amazon problem. Okay, I'm getting some issue with my mouse here, but let me show it to you here. So Unity of Command, logistics. So there's two challenges in warfare. The first one is fighting. The second one is actually being able to supply your front lines with weapons. Because even if you have the best soldiers, if they don't have ammo, if they don't have guns, if their guns are rusting, they're all going to die. They're just going to lose the war. And so a game that basically turns this into a first-class game mechanic that you can learn from is Unity of Command. And a lot of other games do it as well, but I personally feel like this game does a particularly good job of doing it. So similarly here, we look at this stuff here. And let me just see the supply view here. Okay, yeah, let's go back here. So I just want to show you this view here. Where is it? Yeah. So you can think of these numbers as how efficiently is this area being supplied. Like the game basically starts off here. You have a supply line that's on a highway. And you're basically feeding those supplies to your soldiers that are in this area. But if your soldiers are, let's say, up in mountainous areas, then even though they're well protected and more difficult to siege, because they're also on a mountain, it's actually more difficult for you to supply weapons to them. And so this is actually very intuitive. Like you talk to any general, like they're going to be aware of this. But this is not, I think, like necessarily an idea that the general public is aware of, because games and movies haven't done necessarily a good job at communicating these ideas. Whereas here, because it comes in a game and it's as something as boring as a number, it ends up creating very different incentives that not just make you think like a military, like make you think like just a warfare general. It actually makes you think like an actual general, where you need to think about the morale of your troops, their weapons, their experience, and supplying them. And I just think this is amazing. Like the fact that you can teach this in something like a game better than any sort of military journal is amazing, just straight up. And so there's more examples here. So sort of, let's say, in real-time strategy games, like there's often this emphasis on warfare. But what if we weren't even to make war an emphasis of the game? Like what if, for example, you could play a big company, and as a big company, you mine resources, you produce resources, and then you sell them to your competitors. And then you can acquire your competitors, or you can make certain goods that your competitors really need very expensive. So how can you basically... Yeah. So how can you make basically the stock market a game? Like this is basically what this game about. And so you'll see here, for example, that the game immediately just gives you a view like these are all the resources that are available. These are their price in the stock market. And then you can think, oh, okay, well, my competitor San Marino, for example, is going to need a lot of like carbon to be able to create steel. So let me just like basically like monopolize all the carbon supply in the map, make it really expensive, and force them to buy all their carbon from me. And so again, you want to understand like corporate aggressive takeovers. You want to understand like the cutthroat aspect of business. Like, yeah, you could read financial statements, you could read case studies, or you could play a game like Offworld Trading Company and just get a very visual depiction of this effect yourself. And so again, like here, I talked a lot about warfare, I talked a lot about programming, but like let's just talk about something even weirder. Like let's say I wanted to teach you about 4-dimensional like elliptic geometry, right? So this is an arcane topic in math, and the idea is that imagine that we're like instead of being on a grid, we're on an ellipse, and that's how we're measuring distances between each other. And I could give you like classes like this where we go over these sort of complicated math proofs, and maybe you'll go to the Wikipedia page and you'll see visualizations like this that are very pretty, and you'll come in here and you're going to be like, I have no idea what this is talking about. Like, what the hell's an arcsin? Like, what is this little delta? Like, why is this a wall of Greek? Like, maybe I'm an artist and I want to experiment with elliptic geometry. Like, why am I throwing this wall of Greek? So instead of doing all of this, you could play a game like HyperRogue, for example. Where you could like basically just play a game on this sort of elliptic world, and the rules of these games, just even though it's a very simple game, because you translate it over something like a grid or a 3D world, which is what we're used to in a game, in an elliptic world, it ends up being like a great way to explore these ideas without necessarily being like hammered with walls of Greek. Even more examples. So let's say like this is a game I really love called Rimworld. So basically it's a colony survival game. So in this game, you're basically thrown in on a like sort of barren world with 3 colonists, and you're tasked with the goal of surviving. And so in trying to survive, you have to basically build your own colony. You have to build defenses. You have to build like a farm. You have to make sure that your colonists have a place to sleep. So it's sort of like The Sims on steroids in some sense. Just one moment here. It's sort of like The Sims on steroids. And let me just show you like an example of why this is interesting. So you come in here, you create a world. Like the game comes in and generates this whole ecosystem for you. Like each time, so it's very different. Like this is what the whole global world looks like. And I'm going to decide, for example, to be somewhat suicidal and start a colony in the middle of the desert, right? So I come in here and I see like my colonists have different skills. Like some are good at construction, some are good at mining, some are good at cooking. So all of a sudden here, or like let's say I have Teresa who's an entrepreneur and she's very good at socializing, for example, but is fairly useless at everything else. Yeah, she does sound like an entrepreneur. Or you could be an AV scientist. So like here, you're very artistic and intellectual. So all of a sudden here, okay, well, we have a colony where it seems like Chef is the only one that can do anything useful, and everyone else has like these weird arcane skills that aren't immediately useful for a new colony. And you're thrown in and you're tasked with surviving in the desert. So great. You come in here and you're like, okay, great. Like all I have is like some wood and like a bunch of steel and some food rations, and I'm in the middle of the desert. How do I survive? So great. So you come in here and you go in like, okay, well, I'm going to create the stockpile zone. I'm going to create a dumping zone here to be able to throw away my trash. I want to also, for example, create like 3 beds for me so that my colonists can sleep well. But given that it's in the middle of the desert, it's going to be really hot. I want to come in and I want to just have a construction where I build like these walls for them here. And then I also want to basically, let's say, roof this. And then it's like, okay, well, then it's going to get really hot. So then I need an air conditioning. So I need to come in and I need to build like, let's say, an air conditioner. But to build an air conditioner, I need power, and to get power, I need like, let's say, a wood fire generator with wood, but there's no wood in the desert, so why not use sun power? because I'm in the middle of the desert. Or like, okay, I want to eat, so I come in and I come here to zone, and I set up a growing zone, right? And then, great, so I come into the growing zone, then I think like, well, what kind of plants can I grow? And it turns out you're in the middle of the desert, so most plants you'll grow here will die, like only cactus will survive. And because you're tasked with just surviving, but because the game is so open-ended and loose, you end up learning so much about agriculture, survival, medicine when you're trying to cure your colonies of different diseases. You learn about, like, let's say harvesting, like growing animals, harvesting their skin, turning them into meals. And the game just adds like an infinity amount of mods to just make the systems more and more complicated. And again, this is fun. Like, I want to just see how long I can survive. But as a side effect, I end up learning so much about just all sorts of random stuff that I never expect about learning. Like, for example, I'm in the middle of the desert. Would it be better to have like a roof that's made with wood or stone or steel? Odds are steel would insulate, like steel aren't a great idea, because you just end up just amplifying heat inside of your colony. But like, let's say once you've insulated heat inside, maybe it's a good idea because you don't want the cool air from your air conditioning to escape out. Again, you end up learning so much, even though all you're doing is having fun. And again, this is one of the games that people are willing to spend thousands of hours in. Another example of a game like this is a game I picked up recently. It was called Oxygen Not Included. So in this game, for example, like, it's very similar. Like, you have you're on an asteroid in space and you're tasked with survival. And so the game emphasizes different aspects because obviously it's a different designer. So why are these games so loud? Okay, never mind. So let's say here, for example, like, I'm going to just show you, like, I learned the hard way. Like, I had, for example, here, like the place where my colonists sleep. And then when they come in here, I had like these toilets, and then all of the, can you talk about Minecraft? Sorry if you talked about it already. Yeah, so funnily enough, like, I would say that all of the games I introduced, like Rimworld, where was it here? Factorio, Oxygen Not Included, Rimworld, like, they share a common design tree, which is Minecraft. So Minecraft is sort of the granddaddy of all of these games, because Minecraft was the first game to sort of introduce this open-ended curiosity as a goal for the game. And when people started modding Minecraft, there were mods to, for example, add factories in or add programming in. And all of those mods ended up becoming their own independent games once that independent experience was polished. But if anything, the popularity of Minecraft really tells me one thing, is that people don't like being told what to do. Like, let's say I really wanted to play like a game like Death Stranding, like recently. But in Death Stranding, like, it's a very linear game. It's mostly a movie. Like, I'm watching cutscenes for the most part. I go from quest marker to another. I don't want that anymore. Like, I feel like I'm bored of games telling me what to do. I want a game that gives me a sandbox for me to explore interesting ideas. And then I just want to explore in the sandbox, and I want the interactions in the sandbox to be interesting. So, Minecraft, vanilla Minecraft in of itself, I don't think is all that interesting. But you add the modding capability, all of a sudden, you turn the whole generation of gamers into game developers. So you turn the whole generation of consumers into creators. And the experience they created were far beyond like what I would expected Notch to have ever imagined when he started working on Minecraft. And so again, like Zachtronics games, Factorio, Rimworld, Oxygen Not Included, all of these games, their grandfather is Minecraft. And so let's talk about like this, like another idea for a second. So like, what does it mean to have curiosity as a goal? So often, like, when we think of a story, like, we think of a novel, which is like, you know, for the most part, I don't know, like Victor Hugo talking about some ladies in flowy dresses back in the day, and like the problems between lords and the peasantries, you know, and that's all fine and interesting. But as far as I'm concerned, I don't personally find this all that interesting. Because I feel like very ADD in the sense where I can't spend all that much time reading these very long-winded descriptions, and I'd rather just explore a world that exists. And so I want to show you a few examples of games that do this very well. So like, let's say there's a game I recently played, not that recently, maybe it's like 2 years ago now, called Hypnospace Outlaw. And so what this game does is you're an internet detective in the 90s. And so the game shows you Alright, so the game shows you like an early version of the internet, and you basically get to explore an early version of the internet without necessarily having been alive then. Like, I mean, how do you even communicate this in a book format? It's just not gonna, like, it's just not a doable task. Like, you're just, look at this, like, this is just the menu, but the menu has a similar vibe that old operating systems had back in the day. So, like, let's say I'm just going to decide in and I'm going to boot the OS. The game also gives you this very interesting vibe. It's like, oh yeah, like, I am back in the internet, like the cool, like, flash graphics. So let's just wait for this to load and I can show you a bit more, like, why this game's interesting. So yeah, so I'm just going to log in the game. And the game here basically, like, is experienced, like, where the interface is literally a browser in the 90s. Like, that's it. Like, this is what the game looks like. I'm going to come in here, for example. Where's the browser? Like, you know, you'll see here, double click. Like it even has, like, these animations with these, like, cringy graphics, like, very similar to what corporations did in the 90s. And again, yeah. So, and the game does end up creating, like, a whole browser experience. So, like, I think I played this game on my Mac, so the progress isn't saved here, but let me just show you this here. So, for example, here, you'll see that the game ends up looking more like this. Like, you're navigating from page to page, and you click on links. And so, if I were to help you understand what did the internet look like in the 90s and why does it look different now, the best thing you can do is just play this game. Like, it is not to read books or blog posts about how the internet was. It's to give you a first-hand experience, sort of a sandbox you can explore that emulated what the internet looked like back in the day. And if I can make it fun, then that's even better. And this is what this game does. So another game that I felt was very unique in this respect was this game called Outer Wilds. So Outer Wilds is a sort of like adventure game where you're stuck in a 30-minute time loop where the world is going to end in 30 minutes. And so as opposed to most games where the way you progress is, for example, getting more skills or getting more stats, in Outer Wilds you progress by learning more about the world. It's just literally information is the goal. Like, curiosity is the goal of the game. And so, like, your goal is to eventually figure out, like, why is it that the world is ending? Can I stop it? And if not, well, great. Like, what other mysteries exist in this world? So let me just show you, like, how this game does this and does it very well, in my opinion. So I'm just going to get my Xbox controller because it's a lot more pleasant to play on a controller. All right. So first off, like, the game is very good at sort of giving you this, giving you this sort of serene vibe, where you're exploring a world. It's beautiful, it's soothing, but it also has many mysteries. The world has its own unique laws of physics that you discover by reading old ruins. It has old adventures that you may meet in the world that'll give you secrets. It's not a game I want to spoil because it is something that, like, you just need to kind of, I don't know, experience for yourself. But I'm just going to give you, like, just this is what the game looks like at the very beginning. So I'm not going to be spoiling anything. So you walk in here, for example, and, you know, you're just, like, roasting a marshmallow. Like, there's no reason for you to roast it. It's just, like, something cool you can do as part of experiencing the world, which is similar to real life. Like, not everything you do necessarily has the goal of furthering your career goals. So if we keep going here, for example, you'll notice, like, okay, I'm on this world. It's already a lot of stuff going on here. And, you know, you come in here. And, like, for example, these are, where was it here? So this is, like, I'm not going to show you this, but for example, this is all the information that I've acquired about the game so far. And the game does a good job of showing you all the connections. And so while the game still doesn't have a concrete goal, it helps you figure out, like, well, like, look, this is what you learned already by playing. and it makes all the information you acquired a concrete, rewarding thing you can look at. So the bigger this gets, the prouder you get at your accomplishments. But none of this would work if the game just wasn't a blast to explore. So this is me like flying off, and you can see here like, okay, you're like, whoa, like this is the sun, these are the different planets, and if I show you this view, like these are all the planets in this game. You can land on all of them. All of them have a sort of unique vibe to them. So let's say I'm gonna land on Bristle Hollow right now. So Bristle Hollow, for example, is a planet that slowly crumbles, and like that's its own mystery to resolve. It has all these old ruins that you can figure out. So we can land on this planet, go figure out all the ruins in it. But again, like none of this would work if the game in of itself wasn't fun, if the game wasn't beautiful, and if the mysteries of this world weren't genuinely interesting. So when I think now of a novel, I think, why are you showing me this curated view from the standpoint of an individual character? Why not just show me the world and let me drive like my own learnings and my own like adventure from it? And so this ends up, it's a lot more complicated. But for me, like when I look at a game like this is what I think is the future of the novel. And so there's other games that do this, sort of mix this very well. So for example, there's this other game called Kenshi, which sort of mixes ideas from, it's a much older game than Hypnospace Outlaw, but it mixes some ideas from role-playing games and the idea of a world that you can explore, and I think it does a particularly good job of doing it. So let me just quickly show you this game. So this game is heavily modded at this point because it's very old, so it definitely adds a lot of quality of life improvements here. But like it'll still give you a good taste of what I'm trying to do. So like let's say here, I'm going to load the world I had. So what's very unique about this game is that it has no goals. Like if anything, Outer Wilds still has a goal. Like it's, why is the world blowing up? Here it's like absolutely no goal. It's really like world is what you make it to be. All you know is you're living in this extremely harsh world. It's mostly a desert. There's barely any resources. Most of it looks like this. It looks very boring and drab. But what makes the game really unique is this. So for example, like I can come in the game. So this is the world. I can, for example, decide that I want to be an adventurer. And so I'm going to go in from the map and go to these holy ruins, find sacred treasures, and then go back to major cities and sell them. Or I could start like building like my own outpost, for example. Here, where's my base? Or like I want to start building like my own base and like farm in it. Or I want like just to have like a band of outlaws where I just like go about like mugging people and stealing their shit. Or I can be a farmer that doesn't get involved with anyone. I just like farm shit, and then I go like I can open up a shop, my own shop, or I can go sell it in the main store. And I think this game is incredible. It's janky as shit. Like this is not a it's not a game that does a good job of communicating why it's so good. But once you get into it, you realize that it's like when we talk about sandboxes, this is okay. Yeah, you look at this. So for example, like I'm coming in here and these guys like just want to come mug me. And so for example, I could go like fight them, or like, more likely than not, I actually just need to run away. Like I can't actually fight like all of these bandits. So I need to just like run away. Hopefully they don't see me, and if they do, they'll just mug me. Maybe they'll beat me up a bit. I'll wake up a bit later. Maybe I'm fine, maybe I'm not. So you don't need quest markers or cutscenes to create a story. Like there's just a natural story that will be created here with my interaction with these guys. And so when I think of, again, like what is a novel 2.0, it is creating your own unique world and then just letting the player act through it. And so like you could say like, what's the point, right? Like, I mean, but again, here I would say like, what's the point of a novel? And for the most part, the point of a novel is learning like the point of view of the author, or it could be learning some unique point of view about the world. But it could be like, you could learn a real skill. So for example, like let's say if you played a game like Farming Simulator, for example, and you don't know shit about farming, you are going to learn, a bunch about farming by playing this game. Like maybe you never grew up on a farm. Maybe none of your relatives is a farmer. Maybe like none of your friends are a farmer. But just by playing this game, you're going to understand like a bit more what it's like setting up your crops, getting the machinery, setting up like your yield cycles, giving tasks like to your different family members, trucking like your supplies from one area to a farm to another. So is this fun? Yes, like I definitely agree that it's fun, because there is a sort of engaging game loop where you want to make your farm bigger and more interesting. And you know, if you can learn how farming works, like, and get a better appreciation for farmers as a result, why not? Like, why not make this a game? And so there's other elements here that I think do a good job. So back in this sort of theme of storytelling, like when people think of Dungeons and Dragons, I generally feel that the first thing people think about is sort of like these stats. Like they think, oh, like I have these like giant sheets and I'm going to roll these dice, and you know, I'm sitting there in my like basement and I'm doing like all this like nerdy stuff where I'm like, well, you know, you take like 2 dice and then I'm going to add a modifier of +2 and then I'm going to do the crit. But if you've played D&D, that's not what D&D is about at all. Like D&D, like the primary function of D&D is to create a world where the world has some rules just so that to sort of guide your exploration through it. And that's the job of a DM. The job of the DM, the dungeon master, is not to power trip and just kill off his players, sort of like, let's say, like a Dark Souls style, is to create an engaging world with engaging characters that you can interact with. And so that's why backstory is interesting. That's why descriptions are interesting. That's why, like, so it ends up creating the sort of only example of collaborative storytelling that I know of in a game. And so often, like, I often hear salesmen talk about, like, well, you know, like the function of sales is to create an engaging story around your product. And so, sure. And so the best way to learn how to, oh, hey, Krishna, how's it going? So the best way to learn how to do better stories is to just, you know, write more stories. And the best way to do it is to make it fun. And one of the best ways to make it fun is via a game like Dungeons and Dragons. So this is the only, I believe this and chess were the only non-video game examples that I had in this list. But they are particularly good examples that I felt like I definitely needed to be mentioned. So there's another game I want to talk about. So Baba Is You. So this is a game that I talk about it sort of shows you the expressive, like how expressive programming can be. So Baba Is You is basically a game where you push tiles, and the tiles have words in them. I'm just going to show you the trailer because I think it does the best job at communicating this. So, and after pushing these tiles, they create new rules. So let's say here, you go like, well, Baba is you, and, you know, rock is push. You know, these are the rules of the game so far. But if you said rock is you, you know, now you're a rock, and now you may be able to solve puzzles in a different way. So again, a wall is stop, but if you move the stop, they just go through walls. Like, and this just defies logic. Like, you just take the rules of the game. Baba is melt. You know, no, it's not. Lava is melt. So you just go to lava. Or Baba is more, and you multiply Babas. And so one thing I really like about programming is that you end up with these like sort of small modular components that you can fit with each other. And I personally felt like this was one of the best games at making this a first-class citizen in a game, making it fun, making it beautiful with a cool soundtrack. And so I would even argue, like, I mean, again, all of these games that I talked about, like, a lot of people would say, like, oh, they're just games. But I would venture, like, most people that would say that would not be able to actually finish this game, even if there was money associated with it. And if anything, it just shows you that, like, people just haven't adapted to this new medium. So if you adapt to it, there's definitely quite a bit you can learn here. So let's keep going through this. This gets exponentially like more complicated, like all sorts of cool rules. I think people even have built like Turing machine with this. Like, let's see. Yeah, so people have built like a full computer like this. So Turing machine is basically the basic thing you need, like abstraction for what a computer can do. So if you can emulate a Turing machine, it means you can emulate an arbitrary thing that a computer can do. So this is like an example of a Turing machine. And again, it's mind-boggling to me that you could take this cutesy-looking game and then actually end up doing something that looks like this here. So, but there's other examples. Like, again, I mean, let's say, yeah, Crusader Kings is an interesting one. Let me just show you this game. So Crusader Kings is basically a monarchy simulator. So you're role-playing as a lord, like let's say a minor lord or king or duke or whatever, or maybe you just had your kingdom taken away from you. So you come in here, and the map is extremely opaque and obtuse. Like learning how to play this game is definitely not pleasant. But once you get into it, you can end up creating all sorts of interesting storytelling experiences. So let me show you some of them. So, why is this taking so long? Okay, never mind. Okay, I don't need to show this to you. But like, suffice to say, like, different civilizations will have different, like, let's say, succession laws. So, for example, you're a king, and you really want to make sure that your son ends up being the next king. And you only have daughters. And you don't want your brother to be the next king. Well, if you're in a government where the eldest becomes the king, then you're really incentivized to kill your brother. Oh yeah, let me do that. Crusader Kings 2. So the game looks like this. Like it's literally just a map. You know, it's like the most boring UI you've ever seen ever. But part of what makes it really interesting is, like I said, like let's say the idea of succession laws. You don't want your brother to be king because, like, let's say you don't have a son yet, and let's say your wife isn't giving you a son, then you may end up like having another concubine to get it. You may end up killing your wife. All sorts of weird storytelling experiences that will make you feel like a sociopath. But actually, if you look at the history of, like, let's say rulers and kings in Europe, it is in fact what they ended up doing. Like succession is everything. Like making sure that your son gets on the throne is everything. And the fact that you can turn this into a game, for me, was amazing. Like this is the closest you can get to Game of Thrones as a game, but everything. And there's even a Game of Thrones mod to make this point really obvious. Let me show it to you. Game of Thrones, Crusader Kings 2. Or like, let's say in the case of like, let's say like the Mongol society, it's the youngest it's the youngest that ends up owning everything, not the eldest. And so what ends up happening is because the youngest is so young, like they just end up being killed over and over again. And so once you get a youngest child, you really, really need to protect them, or like not really declare them in public who they are right until it's time for succession and they're of like fighting age. That's when you go like, well, you know, this is my son, they need to be king. And I think, again, the fact that a game can teach you these things is incredible, and probably more instructive than most history books you could read. Some of these lessons become more obvious. Like, let's say, I heard Elon Musk say Kerbal Space Program was his favorite game. And so let me just quickly show you Kerbal Space Program. So it's a game where you're trying to launch a rocket to go to space or Mars or whatever, launch the moon, just get to orbit. The game also has like fairly arbitrary goals, and you can decide like, well, I want to, you know, get there cheaply, or I just want to get like a big cargo to the moon, or I want to get to the moon as fast as possible. So you determine all sorts of goals for yourself, and the game just creates this sandbox for you to make these sorts of explorations possible. Actually, maybe I'll do this because I think people have done more interesting rockets than I've done. So Kerbal Space Program, let's say crazy design. So you'll see here that people come in and they've actually, like, you know, like, where is it? Here. Like, okay, this guy is like loading his ship. Where is it? You know, like you actually have to come in and think about this design. Like which designs are more aerodynamic? How much do they weigh? How much fuel do you need to individual components? At what stages do you get rid of the individual components? So, I mean, yes, it looks like a game, but it's probably the closest thing you'll get to, you know, doing modern day rocketry. And if anything, you'll probably learn more playing this game than you would, like, let's say, solving differential equations, because those differential equations for rocketry may get you too much in the weeds. And while, yes, obviously you will need those equations, you will need to do those simulations to launch a real rocket, when it comes to getting closest to the spirit of how do I put together a rocket, then this is one of the best ways to do it. And in fact, if you look at the Kerbal Space Program wiki, it's very telling. Like, you come into the wiki here, and, you know, they have like all sorts of, like here, where is it? I'll show you this. Rocketry basics, Kerbal Space Program. It was like really amazing for me seeing this for the first time. So here, for example, they discuss rocket design, like how propulsion works. A bunch of them will even have some equations for you to think about, like how much fuel you need for the different weights. But it also talks to you about the stages, like, okay, well, you need to deploy your parachutes, like decouple your engine, launch vehicle, enable your rocket boosters. So, like, you know, this is probably what a more complete rocket would look like, along with all its parts. So again, you want to learn how rockets work, just play Kerbal Space Program. So, I think that's pretty much it. So, I hope this was interesting to everyone, and my goal with giving you all of these examples was to show you that really, if you get rid of this mindset that learning is equal to memorization, you can see that games end up becoming an extremely good tool for learning things as long as you use their strengths. So I would argue that creating anything, you know, be it in programming or in art or anything that's hard, it's a function of, do you have the curiosity for it, and are you putting in the right amount of time with the right discipline to actually see it through? And games have this unique property where it seems that you don't need a lot of discipline to actually finish them, because they're just inherently engaging. Like, people just are willing to spend thousands of hours learning. And so what lessons can we borrow from games to regular learning to better learn? And what games would be better suited to learning some topics than the traditional lecture format? So again, I hope this was interesting, everyone. I'll hang out for like 2 more minutes in case anyone has any questions. I'm happy to answer any. Otherwise, I will be putting a link to this talk on YouTube, on my Twitter, and I'll probably be doing more similar content to this. So yeah, thank you so much, everyone. So yeah, let me know if you have any questions. Like, I'll just be, I guess, hanging out, having coffee in the meantime. And, you know, cheers. I hope you'll like play more games to learn more stuff. So do you think simulations are engaging enough? Okay, yeah, so I think there's a very simple way to answer this question. So let's say I want to look at Rimworld, right? So this was an example of a simulation game. And like, if you look at the top reviews, like, this is a dude that spent 2,000 hours playing this game. This is someone who spent 200 hours in this game. Let's look at Crusader Kings. You know, we looked at it, looked like one of the most boring UIs ever. But because it creates like all these interesting stories, let's get some sense of how much do the top reviewers in Crusader Kings spend time on this game. So 300 hours, 390, 80, 500, 8.5. So I definitely think like maybe it's not for everyone, but there's definitely seems to be a subset of people that are willing to play these games at the expense of doing everything else, including their chores or work or whatever. So yeah, definitely. I think as a medium, games are very engaging because they're active. Like, nothing happens unless you're doing it. Whereas in a movie, you know, or like, let's say series more particularly, it's very easy to go into potato mode where you're just sitting on your couch and you're consuming this. And even though like games have this reputation of being like, you know, like you're the big gamer and you're not doing anything and you're just like sitting like an addict. Well, but you know, nothing is happening unless you're doing it. And given that, like, I actually don't know anyone at this point who doesn't maybe spend their nights like watching Netflix. You know, I think this reputation that like games aren't engaging is like borderline nonsensical. Even books, I would argue, are less engaging because you can just flip pages without actually doing anything. You're just flipping pages. Whereas a game is not going to progress. You're actually not going to be able to complete a game unless you're actively playing a role in it. Specifically, Factorio, I would challenge anyone that says games are a passive activity to launch a rocket in Factorio. So I have a better abstract question. So have you ever felt there's a relationship between strategy games and open games? So economics concept in this paper. I don't know. Let me just read this paper. So backprop. Oh, this is an amazing paper. I actually have a blog post where I talk about this paper quite a bit, where I talk about supervised learning as a box. Yes, I definitely think there's a relationship. Like, strategy games are, for the most part, about managing a resource, which is you're managing some sort of limited amount of resources like money, pylons, units, time, to be able to accomplish some goal, like win, get the biggest base, defeat your enemy as quickly as possible, etc. And so I would say strategy games all follow this basic framework. Open-ended games often have a similar framework, but the goal tends to be curiosity. I feel like there's no reason not to marry the two. Like, for example, in Factorio, your goal is to launch a rocket by being able to have a very efficient pipeline of systems that you produce to create all the necessary resources to launch the rocket. But after you launch the rocket, you end up learning so much about the game that maybe you're like, well, now I want to launch one rocket a minute. Or now I want to launch a rocket while wasting 0 resources. Or now I want to launch a rocket with friends. And so this ends up marrying the idea of an open-ended game with a strategy game. But for the most part, I believe that the future of games and the reason why Minecraft sort of took the world by storm is I feel those two genres, like open-ended games and strategy games, are just going to be the future of games. Because I think people are sick of these curated, hand-holded games where you just watch one cutscene after another. It's a lot better to have this as a Netflix movie where, you know, maybe you take the occasional action by saying, I'm going to take choice A to choice B. Like, let's say Witcher. Like, Witcher 3 is a very famous RPG. But I would argue it's not a role-playing game. It's actually a very curated game because you're mostly saying, for example, I want to ally with this person or I don't want to ally with this person. Whereas games like Kenshi, but for the most part, in Witcher, you're playing as a swordsman who is a bounty hunter, meeting kings, killing monsters, selling them. So you're always like in the same game loop. Whereas in games like Kenshi, even though the game looks like a role-playing game, the fact that you can play as a farmer versus bounty hunter versus adventurer versus a manager base builder versus like a heretic, like this is the future of role-playing games. And yes, the game looks janky because it was made by a small team. The amount of creative effort that went to that game, I think, is a lot bigger than the amount of effort that came into creating Witcher. Witcher is a beautiful, curated world that creates like these engaging stories, but for the most part, playing Witcher, there's like a few distinct stories that you're going to face. Whereas Kenshi is an engine for stories. Like the more you play Kenshi, the more stories you're going to generate. And so Witcher is a game that you'll play maybe for 200 hours and still see new stuff. Kenshi is something you can play for thousands of hours and still have new experiences. So are there any games in your opinion which explore this learning concept? So that's a good question. Like, I don't know if there are games that specifically do the best job at explicitly saying, I am teaching you a thing. I would say the closest thing to that would be the Zachtronics games, IO, Shenzhen I, Opus Magnum. You're learning how to program. So another great example that Sarah mentioned in chat was Mario Maker, where actually, I don't know if you know Sarah, but Celeste Mario Maker levels. So for example, the actual Celeste developer mentioned a couple of times that he's made a couple of levels like in Super Mario Maker sort of as practice, because in Celeste it's going to be more complicated for him because he needs to use his own engine, which may or may not be good as the engine for Super Mario Maker. Like, it's more challenging. So he often said he uses Super Mario Maker as a way to prototype game designs, and then if he wants to add those levels to Celeste, he'll do that port manually himself. But yeah, like, I mean, you want to learn game design. Super Mario Maker even has one of the best game design tutorials at the very beginning where they talk about this idea of a stage. Actually, I want to show you this. So Celeste level design. So the Celeste guy talks about this a lot, but it's not his idea, actually. It's an old idea from Mario, actually. Where was it? Where was this chart? Moment. Okay, maybe I'll just draw it. I think it'll be simpler. So Google drawing. Okay. So typically in a level, and this is very similar in any story as well. Like, let's say I wanted to plot two axes. So I have this axis is going to be beginning to basically time, and then this is going to be intensity, right? So typically when you start, you want something that starts off slowly, right? You want it to maybe build up and it's slow, and maybe you have like a bunch of difficulty curves, and it slowly goes up and it slowly goes up, and then it goes down, and you're like, oh, I'm out of the water, and then wait a minute, I'm at the beginning of the boss room. Why is it so quiet? Why am I given all of these resources? And then the difficulty just like spikes up here, and then you beat the boss and the level goes down. And because you just had a very intense experience, you need something to cool off, like maybe some lore, maybe you're slowly looking at the environment. And so this idea Super Mario Maker talks about a lot. And so this is sort of like, okay, so so I meant as in ML like optimization. Have you tried your first? But yeah, this is interesting as well. Okay, so actually this answers your question, Krishnan. So let's say you wanted to have a curve which automatically adjusts the difficulty of a video game automatically. What you want it to do is probably have a difficulty curve that looks something like this. So this is your target. Because this works. Like, this is Shakespeare. This is any story where it's like, oh, they're going to be good. They're going to be together. Oh, fuck, she dies. Oh, okay, she dies. Like, like maybe we're going to be together. Like, oh, let's talk about some side characters that talk about Romeo and Juliet for a while. Okay, great. Like, let's talk about this other stuff. Like, oh, these flowers, great. The world ended. And so, yeah, I definitely think, like, because when people think about automatic difficulty adjustment, I would say there's a more naive viewpoint that I used to have in the past before I tried designing my own games, which is closer to this. So let me just draw this as well. So like this, you have your X and Y, and people think like you want to be in a state of flow. So you basically just want your difficulty to be like this. Like basically always constantly challenge the player, but not too much. But this is not fun. Like, this doesn't create a story. This creates a story. So I would encourage more ML people when they think about games to do this, not this. All right. So I'll give you guys like maybe 1 more minute for a question. Otherwise, I'm going to end stream. This has been super fun for me. I think I'm going to take some of the feedback I got from your questions and rehearse it and maybe do a better version of this talk in the future. Otherwise, you can probably expect more ML content, I guess. But again, this is a topic that I've had on my mind for years now, maybe ever since I was a kid. So it felt really good to be able to finally talk about it. And I'm very grateful that, about 10 of you spent the time to listen to me. So thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate it.